Hey guys, what's up? MiataMods here. In this video I'm going to show you how you can replace the belt that drives your power steering pump and air conditioning pump. So, stay tuned. Replacing the accessory or auxiliary belt is a pretty simple job, but make sure you got the right sized belt. My car has power steering but does not have AC, so I got the shorter version. If your car has AC, get the longer version. If you want, you can run the car without this belt. This could come in handy if the belt's broken, if you want to know how the car handles without power steering, or if you're hearing a strange sound in the engine bay and you want to rule out your power steering pump or AC pump. Alright, so pop open the hood as I've done here, and to access the belt you need to make some room in the engine bay. And you can do this by removing this intake tubing. There are some differences between the 1.6, 1.8, NA and NB intake, but the overall process is pretty much the same. If you have the two-piece intake, it's only necessary to remove this piece, but for the sake of filming, I'm going to remove the whole intake tube. The first step is to loosen these three Phillips head screws. Now you could use a screwdriver, but I would advise you to use a socket wrench with a socket, because if you use a screwdriver, the angle is a bit weird, especially here because of my homemade intake, and you risk damaging the head of the bolt. So just use a socket wrench, 10mm socket here, and this one is a 8mm socket. The next step is removing this 10mm bolt near the throttle body. Now you can remove these two hose clamps and pull the hoses off. If they're stuck, like this one here, try twisting them off with some pliers. Now you can loosen this clip, which holds in a bunch of wiring and is located right underneath the throttle body. And the best way to undo this clip is to get a really small flathead screwdriver and wedge it in there, and then pry it open, and then push back on the other side of the clip like that. So it opens, and now you can remove the wiring. That's it. Now we can remove the whole intake tubing, starting with this part. To make your life a little bit easier, you can heat up the plastic so it gets a bit softer and it's easier to remove. So, get out your heat gun, which came with the car, and get this heat gun. Get your heat gun. See, it gets a lot softer, and that's why it's easier to remove. Jesus Christ, Master, what's up with this design?
1 hour later.
Now that the intake tube has been removed, we can focus on the belt. The next step is to loosen the power steering pump. To do that, you need to access a bolt that's behind the pulley. If you're lucky, you can access it right away, but if it's not accessible, you can either crank over the engine by flicking the key or turning over the engine with a big socket wrench. You can also put the car in 5th gear and roll it a bit if you're worried you'll drain the battery. Flicking the key is by far the easiest option, so that's what I'm going to do now. Let's see if it fits. Nope. Huh, still not the right position. The easiest option. Perfect. Spray some penetrating oil on these 3 bolts and let it sit for a few minutes. We're going to start with this 14mm bolt. Now normally you would use a deep socket because there are a lot of threads visible, but I don't have that, so I'm going to use a regular 14mm socket. Press it on there and then using my socket wrench I'm gonna break it loose. Watch out for your fingers. Damn, that's stuck. It was a bit of a hassle, but the bolt is finally loose. The bolt was moving, but it wasn't getting any easier, so I checked the backside here and I saw that the backside was spinning as well. It's a very long bolt and on the back there's a nut, so I used a second wrench to secure the nut, and with that in place I could loosen the bolt at the front. Now we can continue with this 14mm bolt. And then this 12mm bolt with a 12mm wrench on the backside. Now we can loosen the power steering tensioner. Loosen it all the way until you have no more threads left on this side. Let the power steering pump swing down and remove the belt. The process of removing the belt is the same if you have AC. Before you throw the old one away, make sure you have the correct belt. Check if it's the same width and length by comparing the two belts. Check your alternator belt while you're in there. My alternator belt is gone because it snapped, so I'm going to replace that as well. Replacing the alternator belt will be covered in a separate video. Before installing the new belt, wash your hands so you don't put any grease on the new belt. Also give the power steering pump pulley a quick spin to make sure everything is working correctly. It should spin smoothly. It's also a good idea to clean the pulleys with a brush. Not a wire brush, but with a softer brush. Install the new belt and pull the power steering pump upwards. And make sure the belt is seated properly. Mine isn't. Down here at the crank pulley, so I'll pull the power steering pump down again, give it some slack, make sure it's seated properly down here, and then pull upwards again. Now it's good. To make your life a little bit easier, make sure the hole is at the correct position so you can access the bolt if you want to tighten the pivot bolt. Tighten the tensioner by hand and then with a socket wrench. And keep checking the tightness of the belt by twisting it at the center. If you can twist the belt a quarter of a turn but not more, it has the correct tension. That's it. Now you can tighten this bolt up so it locks the power steering pump in place. This bolt needs to be tightened to 16 foot-pounds or 21 Newton meters. If you do not have a torque wrench, make sure it's snug but don't over tighten it. The next bolt is that one. This bolt needs to be tightened to 35 foot-pounds or 47 Newton meters. Again, if you don't have a torque wrench, make sure they're snug but don't over tighten them. Alright, now for the last bolt, the pivot bolt for the power steering pump. Now earlier on in this video I stated that the bolt was here and the nut was over there. But it's the other way around. So this is the bolt, which you can see sticking out from the back. And here is the nut. And that's why you have a lot of threads on this side. As you can see, the bolt is moving freely. So I need to add a second wrench on the bolt back there. And then I can use this socket on the front to tighten the nut. And this nut also needs to be tightened to 35 foot-pounds or 47 Newton meters. Again, if you don't have a torque wrench, make sure they're snug, but don't over tighten them. Alright, everything is tightened up, but it's always a good idea to give it one last inspection, especially with the alignment of the belts. And as you can see, they are properly aligned. So, now we can reinstall the intake and start up the car. Getting this piece of the intake below the radiator hose can be a bit of a hassle, but what I would recommend you to do is start with this piece, bend this rubber hose backwards, and then insert it with the air chamber facing towards the engine. Make sure it gets past the rubber hose. And now the tricky part. Pull it downwards, make sure it doesn't hit any wiring, and there we go. Put this hose back on, this one back on, and don't forget the wiring harness right around here. Alright, that's reinstalled. Now for the hose clamps. That's one, and that's two. Alright, next up is that 10mm bolt right next to the throttle body, and use some pliers to reinstall it because you don't want to lose that one in your engine bay. And then the last part of the intake. Now that the intake is reinstalled, we only need to tighten these 3 hose clamps. Alright, that's it. Everything is buttoned up. And now we can start the car and see if everything is still working. If you're in a garage, open the garage door a bit so you have some fresh air. Alright. And now for the big moment. Let's see what happens. That was quick. Belts look really good. No slack. Perfect. Well guys, no wobbles and no squeaks, so this job went perfect. If the belt squeaks, it's probably too loose. So loosen the bolts again and tighten up the tensioner a bit more. If it's too tight, it might destroy the bearing or snap the belt. So always be careful. It's also a good idea to double check the tension of the belt after a while, because new belts will always stretch a little bit in the beginning. Well, that's it guys, job's done. I hope you've enjoyed the video and I'll catch you in the next one. Tot de volgende keer. Right next to the... Come on! Until you have no more threads left. Threads. By comparing the two belts. Oh crap. Throttle body. Follow bruh. What Kim with the... Phillips head. My God.